Got it.
Record to the cloud?
Yep.
Great. Okay. Thank you. So this is my very first day. I'm a fledgling pilgrim, first day in France. I wake up and this is what I see as I start off my journey. And here is, all along the way, there are these signs telling you how many kilometers to Santiago. So there I am, I think sort of right near the beginning of the first day, so the middle of the first day, 790 kilometers to go. The trail, the trail went everywhere. This is, here the trail is going through the woods. Here it is, sunny gravel paths, going up hills, going through cities and suburbs. Here's a city. You see a pilgrim, you can tell the pilgrims all have their backpacks. Your backpack is usually about 20 pounds. You don't have to carry a tent, but you do have to carry a sleeping bag, 2 changes of clothes, and all your other supplies. But and usually carry, food and water and toiletries and whatever. But it's about 20 pounds, and you really try to keep it light. Here's another trail, sort of along the road, up and down hilly mountains. This is one of my favorite. You got the olive trees on one side and the grapevines for the wine on the other. So if you're a wine drinker, that was also another bonus on the trip. Is in the evenings, wine was delicious and it was inexpensive, and everyone just drank wine. But then there were also many other things to drink, of course. But anyway, it was just sort of like olives and wine, and it's just wonderful. So they're pilgrims. So I was there by myself, but it was not, I was never lonely. There were always people there along the path who would stop or walk alongside me, or I walk alongside them, and we talk for a little bit, and then they might move on. We just say Bad Camino, and I'd never see them again, and that was fine. But we'd sort of tell each other our life story for an hour and then move on. Here again, the trail is going through. This is northern Spain is the real breadbasket of Spain. I discovered lots of fields, lots of things growing, very lush, very beautiful. There I am with the fields behind me. This is again the Camino's just going through a suburb. Here, walking through fields again. It was very rainy when I was there. It was a particularly cold, rainy spring. We had these big ponchos that we'd wear over our backpacks and I only had 2 pairs of shoes. I had my walking boots, which were waterproof, and then I had a pair of Crocs because they were light and I'd wear them in the evenings. Fashion goes out the window completely on this trip because you just want to bring the lightest things you possibly can. That's what my feet looked like most days, my boots, just covered in mud. In the mornings, it was cold. There was frost on the ground. So I was going to Spain in May and June, and I was told, bring shorts and t-shirts, which is what I did. But I almost never wore shorts. I had these long pants that you could zip off the lower half so you'd have shorts, but I never did that. I just had long pants and t-shirts. So I had 2 changes of clothes. I had 2 t-shirts, I had 2 pairs of pants. I had 1 fleece jacket and 1 rain jacket and a poncho. And that was it. This was the coldest day. It was up about halfway through the Camino, up high, called a Masada, sort of a high plain, very windy. It was very cold. I was wearing every article of clothing that I own, and it was just bitterly cold. But that was just the weather that season. Don't stop walking. That was the message for the whole. You walk and you walk and you walk and you walk. And one of the many things I learned in the Camino is how we in our society tend to sit a lot, and we spend a lot of time in our heads thinking, and we don't spend a lot of time in our bodies. But when you're the Camino, you walk and you walk and you walk, and you have no time. There's nothing else. There's no to-do list. There's no laundry or groceries or chores, or there's nothing to do except walk. So after about the first week, your head starts to clear out because there's nothing to think about it. After you've sort of spent your first week sort of thinking your thoughts, and after a while you're like, there's nothing new there. So your mind kind of drifts off and you're just in your body. And it's really, that I think is one of the most, it ends up being a meditation. The whole walk becomes this meditation because you're out of your brain and you just be. Here's some just more visions of the different kinds of scenery, the different kinds of paths, rain. There I am. And then it's one of the few hot days I'm actually sweating. I had to verify that this did actually happen. Here's up high in the mountains. This is more towards the western part of the country. There was snow and these sort of high altitude scrub plants and heather. That's me walking around the heather and the snow-covered mountains. And then here in Galicia, it gets very lush and rocky. It's similar, I'm told, to Ireland or New England. There's a lot of stone fences and stone buildings. This is, again, Galicia, the path. A lot of the villages, you know, here we live sort of, each town sort of blends into the next town, where there it was a very clear, you were in the city limits or you were outside the city limits. And cities or villages could be 3 kilometers apart, they could be 10 kilometers apart. So you had to kind of plan, you know, your food and your water and your accommodations, where you're going to spend the night. Can you make it to, would you have enough time to make it to the next village, or should you spend the night where you are? Here's some more scenery of the different kinds of the paths, the way that what the trail looked like. And sometimes you were alone, and sometimes you were lots of people. Sometimes you were in the city, sometimes you were in nowhere. And how you found your way is it was marked, Camino Markers. This yellow sunburst that you see is actually, it's meant to symbolize both a shell, a seashell, sort of a stylized seashell, and also all the different trails that come into Santiago. I was walking what they called the French trail, which is the main trail, but there are other smaller trails that come into Santiago too. And here I am, there are these little markers all along the trail telling you, you know, this is the way you go. And often they tell you what town is. So Zubiri, 6.5 kilometers, you know, so I sort of knew how far I had to go to get to the next town. And these little sunburst, little shells were on buildings and on trees and on everything, marking the path. Here, the other way would be little yellow arrows. So you'd see, whenever you were lost, you just stop and you look for the yellow arrow, the yellow seashell to find your way. Here in the middle of a city, yeah, this was at an intersection, and they said, go this way in the intersection to find, you know, to keep following the path. Sometimes they'd be on the ground. Here's an arrow on a tree. Here's an arrow in the middle of a grapevine field. Here's embedded into the sidewalk. Here on the side of a church. Here just going through the city on a light pole. Here on a ancient stone wall. Here, this was outside a restaurant. And a lot of times they would tell you how many kilometers you had to go to Santiago. If you remember a few slides back, I had the 790 kilometers. Well, now we're down to 697 kilometers. And then here is at 567 kilometers. And now 463 kilometers. 202.5 kilometers, 151 kilometers, and Ocebrero was the village that we were in. 100 kilometers. Now this is a very important marker, because to get your certificate in Santiago that you are a pilgrim, you have to have walked at least 100 miles. You couldn't start at the 50 mile, but so I'd started at the full 800 kilometers. So we have to be careful not to get too on our high horse, because, you know, for those of us who walked the whole way, because a lot of people just join the Camino at this marker. So this is where the Camino starts getting very busy, at the 100 kilometer mark. Here's 84 kilometers. People start leaving little offerings along the way. There I am, only 20 kilometers to Santiago. So to talk about a typical day, that's me here. And then these two women are from Ireland and this woman is from Estonia. People were there from all over the world. All over Europe, people came from all over Europe. Lots of Germans and Italians, lots of Germans and Irish were particularly popular, but a lot of people from all over Europe. I met people from South America. I met people from Africa. I met people from South Korea. South Korea, it's really popular. There was a South Korean who walked it 25, 30 years ago, and she wrote a book about it. And now it's like the thing to do. South Koreans all come to walk the Camino. Of course, Americans, but not as many Americans as you might think. I actually didn't run into all that many. So we would stay in albergues, and albergues are like hostels. They were often big buildings with bunk beds, and you would get one bed for the night, and it would be 5 to 10 euros a night. And that would get you a mattress and a pillow and a bathroom. And if you're willing to chip in a few extra euros, you might get a dinner or a breakfast to go with it. This young man there to the left is actually from China, although he was living in England, and he was sort of part of the group that I was hanging out with for a few days. Often people who walk about the same speed, you'd end up sort of running into the same group of 30 or 40 people sort of throughout the whole Camino. So there's some people you sort of got to know along the way. And then sometimes they'd walk faster than you or slower than you, and you'd lose sight of them. And so people are kind of going in and out of your life throughout the Camino, but there were some same folks you sort of get to know. So anyway, you'd walk all day, and usually you'd arrive at your albergue about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It says, please leave the bedroom before 8 in the morning. So they would usually have lights out at 10 and lights on again at 6 a.m. And a lot of people rolled out of bed at 6 and just started off. I would roll out of bed at 6 and I'd sort of roll out around 7. And then you might walk for an hour, and then you'd have breakfast. This was my favorite breakfast, decaf coffee and a croissant with chocolate. It was pretty awesome. And then you'd walk a little bit more, another couple of hours, you'd walk and take in more of the sights, and then you'd have a mid-morning break, and all the pilgrims would stop at some little restaurant along the way, and you'd catch up with your friends, what's going on, what have you seen, what are you doing, and everyone would, you'd start just for 15 minutes and kind of take off your pack and stretch your legs, stretch your arms, and take a, sit down for a little bit. And a lot of these places were really geared towards pilgrims. Sometimes your mid-morning break, this is a friend of mine, Kim, she was a church secretary from Chicago. We ran into each other. We ended up traveling together for about a week. And you sometimes just buy bread and cheese or snacks. And so when mid-morning break came, there was no restaurant. You weren't in near a town. You'd just stop by the side of the road and have your little break. The toilets are only for customers who spend at least €1. Sorry for the inconvenience. So you learn. So I think when you go in the summer and it's hot, people would stop all the time and take breaks to get it, to get a drink of water, or that you'd be carrying water. I was cold, so I was just ordering coffee, decaf coffee the whole. So I go into a and I'd stop at my breaks and I'm like, decaf coffee. I learned to say it in Spanish. I don't speak Spanish, but I learned to say, café descafeinado con leche, por favor, which I know Spanish now. And then you could use the bathroom. So that was that was worth it. And then after your mid-morning break, you'd walk a little bit longer, and you'd walk a little bit longer. And then at lunchtime, you'd stop and you'd get a tortilla, which is not a Mexican tortilla. It was a Spanish dish with egg and potato, usually, and it would be served with a slice of bread and then my cup of decaf coffee. This was another one. This was a tuna one. They had with fresh tuna in it, so different kinds of tortillas, and you just, whatever the local place has, you just get what they have. This was fun. I think this was a pig leg, and they would slice off bits of it for your lunch. And then you'd walk more after lunch, and you'd walk more. And then you might, here we found a farmer's market. They were selling fresh cherries and wrapped it in some newspaper and had a little snack as we continued walking. And then, so it's like 3, 4 in the afternoon, so you've been walking, you start walking at 7 in the morning and you walk until roughly 3 in the afternoon. And you arrive at the albergue. Here's another albergue. Some of them were people's homes and they just rented out rooms that had a bunch of bunk beds in them. Sometimes they were, so I stayed at albergues that had as few as like 2 bunk beds, 4 beds. And some albergues, the largest one I stayed at had 200 beds. A lot, and this is an albergue, this was a typical one, maybe 40 beds, 30, 40 beds. You'd go in, you'd register. These 3 people, this is the secretary from Chicago and a couple from Africa, and the 4 of us traveled together for a few days. We were registering in the albergue, had a little restaurant there where you could get food if you wanted. And then the first thing they do, services, sleep, €5, dinner, €7, breakfast, €3, cold drink or beer, €1, coffee, tea, €1, washing machine, €4, dryer, €4. And then massages for tendinitis and blistering. Your feet were very important. People talked about foot care was a big topic of conversation. I never paid so much attention to my feet in my life. But after you checked in, you then you immediately had to take off your shoes. They didn't let you in the albergue wearing shoes. So you put your shoes and your walking sticks at the outside, and then you could enter. So you're walking along in your stocking feet, carrying your backpack, exhausted. And then they assign you a bed. And the bottom bunks were the primo bunks. So you wanted a bunk, you didn't want the top bunk. So there was a big scramble to who could get to the albergue first and get the bottom bunk. And here, this is me, I got the bottom bunk at this one here. It's my sleeping bag rolled out. They even had blankets, which is atypical, but a nice feature. And then each person would have a little cubby where you could put your backpack. A lot of places, most places did not. Here's another one. So this albergue, this was like in someone's house. These were the only 6 beds in the whole albergue. I was in the top bunk in the back. The top bunk was bad because of the person underneath you rolled over in the middle of the night. The whole thing would shake. And if you're in the top bunk, it's like, you're shaking. And in the middle of the night when it's pitch dark and you don't know where you are and your bottom of your feet are covered with blisters and you're coming down the ladder and you hit the ladder wrong, so the ladder hits your blister, painful. But that was just all part of the adventure. Here's another albergue, so you sort of, in the middle of the night, people would be groaning or talking in their sleep in 50 different languages. It was fascinating. There I am one night in one of my bunks. This was a top of the line albergue because the bunk was actually bolted into the wall, so it didn't jiggle. It was great. Here's another albergue. As I said, fashion sort of goes out the window. I was doing a lot of laundry that day. All of my pants were soaking wet and mud covered. So I just wrapped a scarf around me so I could wash my pants. And then I'm wearing my Crocs and a pair of socks. I mean, it's just, I look ridiculous, but you just don't care. You stop caring. Bathrooms, sometimes they were divided by gender. Often they were gender neutral. Just everybody used the bathrooms and they were just big. So this was a big part of the day. So you, as I said, you arrive at 3, you check in. The first thing you do is you take a shower. You put on your clean clothes, you take off your dirty clothes, and then the very next thing you do is you take care of your feet. Foot care was huge. A lot of people, they had to stop their Camino in the middle of it because they hadn't taken care of their feet and they couldn't walk anymore. So it was really important. They had all sorts of, as I said, it was a big topic of conversation. There's my feet one day after bandaging them up with moleskin and whatever. And then you would you'd have on your one set of clean clothes, and then your other set of clothes, which are dirty, you'd wash them. They'd have to be washed by hand in cold water. You're also carrying laundry soap with you to wash your clothes. And then you hang everything up to dry, and you hope it's nice weather. Here's just pictures of people washing their clothes and hanging them up, and then you sort of sit around. So after you sort of had your shower and your dressing, and you've done your laundry, and you've taken care of your feet, there's some laundry machines, and you're just sitting around, people's laundry. Oh, this was a day where it was pouring rain, and so it was too wet to dry your laundry outside. So I was in lower bunk, so you tuck your laundry into the bunk above you, so it would hang overnight and dry above you in the evening. So then after you finished all of this, it's maybe, at this point it's like 4 or 5, at least by 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And now you've got your free time of the day, usually about 5 to 7 in the evening is your free time. A lot of times you're exhausted, you just nap. Sometimes I'd write in my journal. Sometimes I would go out and buy food for the next day or buy toiletries or whatever. Here I am with some young Germans, pilgrims, and we all went to a CVS or the Spanish equivalent to pick up some supplies for the next day. And then you go out to dinner. So most Spanish people have dinner at 10 o'clock at night. But for pilgrims, we had to be in bed by 10. So they would have these special pilgrim meals that were fixed price meals and would have a first course and a second course and would include drinks and dessert and bread. And so here you can kind of see your first course, some of the different choices. You had to pick one first course, one out of the second course, and then they would serve you the bread and drink and dessert. Usually it was, you'd get a half a liter, you get this one is a half liter glass of wine. Usually they'd give you a bottle of wine for 2 people. That was sort of the standard pilgrim's meal. And it was always at 7 o'clock because you had to be done by 9 because you had to get into the albergue. They had lights out, door locked at 10. So you want to be back by 9 so you could kind of get ready for bed and get your pack ready for the day and be in bed by lights out. Oh, here I am in Galicia where the specialty was octopus in ink sauce. That was a fun meal. There were all kinds of interesting meals that I shared that I enjoyed. But it was just a great time. All the pilgrims would get together you'd see me, you don't even know these people. You just see somebody, you're like, hey, you going out to dinner somewhere? Sure, come with us. And we'd find, hey, are you a pilgrim? Great. So these people were from Denmark. These people were from Ireland. These people from Germany. This person's from Australia. We're all just hanging out. It was so much fun. So in the evenings, again, just different nights, having pilgrims dinners. This was a group of Germans I traveled with for about a week. Here I am with Kim from Chicago and her 2 friends. And this was an albergue. For the dinner, they had a big kitchen. And so we were allowed to cook our own meal. And so everyone said, hey, so one woman said, from South America, I'm going to cook a South American meal. And another woman from Germany said, I'm going to cook a German meal. And so we all went out and bought supplies and we came in and everyone taking turn chopping vegetables and cooking things. And then we all sat outside and ate this multicultural meal. And it was spectacular. It was just so much fun and delicious. In the evening afterwards, foot massages and conversation. This was a meal at an albergue where they were just the couple two men were just amazing cooks, and they had this fabulous gourmet meal for everybody. And here we are all sitting around the table. We're all just laughing and joking and sharing food and enjoying the meal. And this is Helen. She's a woman I traveled with for about 10 days, and she played the guitar. And the guys at the albergue had a guitar, and she said, "Can I borrow it?" And they said, "Sure." And she started playing Beatles songs, which everyone knew. And the woman next to her is from the States, and she was sort of leading us all in Beatles songs. So we were all just singing When I Was 64 or When I'm 60. You know, it was silly and it was fun. My granddaughter was born during the Camino, Sarah Margaret, and so I was with a group of Australians and Germans, and we all toasted to Sarah Margaret and had a picture taken and texted it over to the States to tell my stepson and daughter-in-law that Margaret was being toasted globally. So this was another albergue. This one was in a church. So churches didn't charge money, but I swear to God that these bunk beds were circa World War II. They were so rattly, but they worked, and I was grateful to have a bed. This was a breakfast in an albergue. So sometimes the albergue served breakfast, sometimes they didn't. So mostly as a pilgrim, you don't sightsee. You are a pilgrim, and that takes most of your energy. There's usually, as I said, only about 2 hours during the day that you have available that's kind of free time. So usually you don't have much time, but sometimes you do get to see things. This is along the way. This is a famous statue along the trail of ancient pilgrims. So often pilgrims have their picture taken in front of this statue. This was an ancient medieval fortress. That's me there. I'm actually wearing shorts in this one, shockingly. There were all these beautiful cathedrals and churches, just magnificent artwork. It's a really stunning. I think this is Vorgas Cathedral, which was, I think, my favorite cathedral along the whole way. I made a point of stopping in every single church or cathedral that I passed along the entire Camino. Not every church was open, but for every one that I could go into, I walked in. This is again Vorgas Cathedral. Oh, so for those of you in the altar guild, this is the sacristy. Kind of stunning. This is a monastery that has its own winery. So as a treat for pilgrims, they have two faucets, one with water and one with wine. And so pilgrims are welcome to partake of both. And the tradition is you take your shell and you put wine and you drink wine from your shell. So that's me drinking wine from my pilgrim's shell. These are some ancient standing stones, thousands of years old. They're sort of one of their Stonehenges. This, I think, is Lyon. Just did some sightseeing around the city. I know this was in Lyon was about halfway through the trip, and a little maybe more than halfway. And I remember I went and I bought myself lipstick and a scarf because I was just so tired of having nothing that was attractive. So I was so excited to be in the city. This is the Cathedral of Lyon. Yeah, this is Lyon. This is a Roman bridge. It is a couple of thousands of years old, and a lot of the Camino was along old Roman trade routes. And so this is one of the most famous parts of the Camino because of that, because it's such an ancient bridge. This is Lyon. Yeah, I'm not going to say what this is. I can't remember which church this is, but it's a beautiful one. This was an empty church. It was deconsecrated but open, and people came in here for prayers. And you can see on here, there are lots of actually slips of paper. So people bring prayers and they leave them on the altar here. This was a 1,500-year-old Muslim well. Just some pictures of some of the sites. Some of these altar pieces were just stunning. This was a beautiful little hexagonal chapel that I went into, and there was a man in there who didn't speak a word of English and I spoke no Spanish, but he gave me a very extensive and beautiful tour, and his love for that place, his enthusiasm was just palpable and joyful, and I just loved that little chapel. It was just precious. This is a cross, as you can see, a very tall cross, and the tradition is as a pilgrim, you bring a stone with you from home, and you carry it in your backpack. And bear in mind, I keep telling you how important having a light backpack is. So to put a stone in there is tough. And it's meant to represent a burden that you carry in your life. And so when you get to this part of the Camino, you lay your burden at the foot of the cross. So those are all stones that pilgrims have laid at the foot of the cross, handed over to Jesus. This was a monastery where the kings of Nayara and Pamplona were buried, some of the 1,000-year-old tombs. This is, you can't tell, but inside here there's actually a chicken and a rooster. This is another cathedral, another church or cathedral. Actually, I think it may be the Nayara Pamplona one. And there's a whole legend that goes with it. But the upshot is if you go in there and the rooster crows, that means that, it's Santo Domingo, that Santo Domingo favors you and you will have a good Camino. So there in the middle of the cathedral, there's little chickens in that little special display case. Here, just pretty bells, storks. This was a 1,000-year-old Romanesque chapel that was across the street from one of the albergues I stayed in. Every church along the way had a 6 o'clock mass for pilgrims. If they had communion, you weren't allowed to receive if you were not Roman Catholic, but they often would have non-communion services so that everyone could feel welcome. And they did make a real effort to try to have all pilgrims feel welcome. Here, this is just one of hundreds of each village had its own little church. And this is one of them, and they were all about this size. This is my friend Helen from Switzerland. She was the one who was playing the guitar earlier. We walked for about 10 days together. Here, just some of the scenery, this is a Knights Templar castle in Pomferetta, the city of Pomferetta, and it was built to protect pilgrims on their way. Here's the view. Sheep going through the villages. There's just, this was a not uncommon sight. Mist in the valley. That's me along poppies. Just some of the stunning views and stunning architecture. Mist coming off the fields in the morning, early morning. Here, vineyards and mountains in the background. Here, Galicia, the stone fences. Often along the trail, you would find each stone represents a prayer, and people would leave stones as prayers along the way. And seeing these sort of piles of rocks was a sign of prayers being left along the way. Here, arriving in Santiago, the Cathedral of Santiago, that was amazing. Here we are, there's a cathedral in the very far distance, and the pilgrims there. At this point, we saw it, we started running. Notice it's raining, of course. It's pouring rain that day. There's a plaza out front, in front of the cathedral. I arrived inside, I put down my wet backpack, knelt down in prayer, and promptly burst into tears, because it's the emotional just of like, it's so exhausting. I'm missing my family. I'm missing my kids. My feet hurt. My legs hurt. I've been looking to this and carrying this pack and being in a country where I don't know the language and I don't know the culture, but at the same time, it was so beautiful. So I was crying both because I had finally arrived, but also sad because it was over. It was just this mixture, which powerful emotions. Oh, and by the way, that little stick in the background, I ended up having this walking stick that I purchased from a little old woman in the mountains. She had carved it herself and sold it to me for €5. She was selling them. That was her only income, selling walking sticks to pilgrims. This is in the Cathedral of Santiago. One of the things it's really known for is this thurible. I don't know if you can, it's hard to sort of see it there, but it's where they put incense, and it's the biggest thurible in the world. Underneath down below, underneath the altar area, these are the bones, presumed the bones of St. James, and they are underneath, and you have to go down, and this is as close as they let you get to it, but that's St. James, presumably. After I arrived at Santiago and was at the cathedral, I then went to get my certificate, which was in this courtyard sort of across the street. And then I got my certificate and met some Danish people I had known along the way. And we all stopped and had a sangria to celebrate that we all had made it. And I got a hotel room, which was awesome after the albergues. Actually, I will say the last week of the journey, Helen and I were sharing the cost of cheap hotel rooms, because then we only had to share a bathroom with each other and not with 100 other people. But this one I had a single room to myself, so it's a big splurge. Here is back in Santiago, in the cathedral. You can see them filling the thurible with incense. And here it is swinging. I don't know if you can see, it's way up there. And there are 8 men at the bottom with a rope guiding it as it's swinging back and forth over the crowds. It's quite dramatic. There it is, perpendicular to the ground. It's right up against the ceiling as it's swinging. That's the ceiling that you're looking at there. And there are the 8 men guiding it and there it is. You can sort of see it swinging over the crowds. It's very dramatic. There's a story that Catherine of Aragon, on her way to marry Henry VIII of England, that she went to Santiago, the cathedral, for a worship service to bless her and her journey and her marriage to King Henry VIII. And that apparently as it was swinging, the thurible broke loose and went through a window, which seemed to be a bad omen for the marriage. And wouldn't you know, she didn't get her head cut off, but she was divorced. So anyway, who knows whether that had anything to do with it. But there's the thurible. It has a name, Bad Camino. And here I had prayers. These were little electric candles. You put in some coins and the light came up on the candle. And then after an hour, it would stop. This guy was from Germany. He happened to be there when I went into the cathedral, so I was sitting next to him as we were both rejoicing at the end of the journey. Here are some German friends that I hadn't seen in weeks, and there they showed up in Santiago. There's my friend from Chicago. I hadn't seen her in a week, and she showed up in Santiago. There's Helen. Here we are in Santiago. This is a famous cake that it's a pilgrim cake from the city, made with almonds. And there's the plaza in front of the cathedral. There's inside the cathedral. This was a famous tour you take on the roof of the cathedral. Fascinating tour of the history of the cathedral from the perspective of the roof. Notice I'm wearing a new sweater. First thing I did in Santiago was buy some new clothes. I was so sick of my 2 outfits. Happy are the people whose strength is in you, whose hearts are set on the pilgrim's way. Me and the cows on the pilgrimage. So that is, that's the end of the formal presentation, and be happy to take questions.
I have a question.
Yes.
When you first started, you were talking about the range of emotions that were involved in this, and one of the emotions that you mentioned was fear, and so I was sort of interested in that one. I understand, I understood a lot of them, but that one was like, well, what's the fear? What were you afraid of?
You mean at the beginning of the Camino, or the?
No, it's when you started your presentation.
Oh, when I started, fear. Well, fear just, can I do this? Am I going to get lost? Am I going to, am I going to poop out? Is it going to be exhausting? Is it going to be, am I going to fail? Am I stuck? I'm in a foreign country. I don't know anybody. I don't know the language. I've never walked 500 miles before. So fear of failure was a big piece of it.
Yeah. Well, especially since it was your sabbatical. It was like, what do I go back and say if I don't? Yeah, I hear you. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
And does everybody, the other question is, you talk about people typically do about 15 miles a day. Were there people that went at faster paces and slower paces? And is that why you'd say we were together about a week and then I wouldn't see him for a while?
Yes, people absolutely went at different paces. Some people went much slower. Some people went much faster. So like there was these young German 20-somethings who I lost because they just went faster. And and when I was with Helen, she actually walked quite slowly. But the way we worked it out is, we both get up at 6 and she'd promptly start walking. I wouldn't start walking until 7. And then somewhere around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we'd meet, and then we'd walk the rest of the way to the albergue, and we'd get there together at 4. So we sort of had come up with this rhythm. But sometimes you'd be walking with someone sometimes you're doing your pace, and then someone who's faster is walking, and then they slow down to walk alongside you for an hour, and you talk, and then you do and then you're just like, oh, well, buen camino, good camino is the phrase you say is a hello and a goodbye, and you say buen camino, and what's your name, where are you from, tell me your story, and you tell your story, and they tell their story, and then they're like, well, buen camino, and then they start walking their own pace, and they pass you. And yeah. Denise.
Stephanie, what was your preparation for this, for knowledge of what you needed to bring? Like, where do you learn about it? Number one, what was your strength building preparation, knowing that you're going to be walking that long? And did you have to make reservations at the albergues or hostels, or were they just enough? There would be enough when you got there. There wouldn't be an issue finding a room.
So I'll answer your last one first. There never was a problem for me. I know if you go in peak season, there can be a problem, but I was sort of in a shoulder season, and there was only one night where it was kind of a little iffy. I wasn't sure I was going to get a bed, but I ended up getting the last bed at the church, the circa World War II bed, top bunk next to the window. It was, but I was in a bunk, so I was happy. The others, I learned what to bring based on, I just went on the internet. What did other people bring, and what did they find useful or not useful? So I sort of tried to copy roughly that. But then as you're going along, at first I was like, oh, I need to bring everything. But the thing is, Spain's a first world country. You can buy what you need. If you don't bring the right stuff, you can get the right stuff. I was going to say, in terms of training, you asked, I started training maybe 3 months beforehand, started just doing hikes, just 2 and 3 mile hikes. And then when I got my boots, I was trying to break them in, and then I got my backpack, and so by the time I left, I was I'd walked 10 miles with 10 pounds. Mm-hmm. But once I got on the Camino, I was walking 15 miles with 20 pounds. So I never quite, in my training, I hadn't quite got up to the full speed. And of course, when I was training at home, I only had one day off a week, which was Monday. So I was doing most of my training on just once a week. And when I got to the Camino, I was going every day. So my first week on the Camino, my legs were so sore. It was so sore. Sometimes I couldn't sleep at night because I was in such pain. My legs, my muscles were so painful. But then it sort of became the new normal. And after a week, it was not a problem. It was fine.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Thank you.
Welcome. Don?
You had said you had a tent in your backpack. Did you ever have to use the tent rather than go to the albergue?
I apologize. I probably didn't speak clearly. I did not have a tent. That was actually a gift, that I did not have to carry a tent.
Okay.
That they were only albergues. I only stayed in albergues. Yeah. I had to carry a sleeping bag, but not a tent.
Okay.
And I didn't have to carry cooking pots and things like that, because I could just eat at rest. So, I mean, it was kind of the ideal camping trip in a lot of ways, because I didn't have to stay in a tent and I didn't have to cook over an outdoor fire. I was always eating in restaurants, and I always had a roof over my head and a mattress. So it was, really pretty cushy in that way.
And wine at the end of the day.
And wine at the end of the day, good wine.
Yeah, right.
Go ahead.
Were all the albergues in towns, or were they scattered, along the route?
They were scattered all along the route. Well, I shouldn't say they were all in towns. They were in villages or cities. They weren't just weren't in someone's house in the middle of nowhere. It was really, they were in, in cities and villages. And some towns had several albergues, and big cities would have many. And there was one village we stayed in. I think the population of the village was 20 people, and when the Pilgrims came, it upped it to 40, and we were the bulk of the population of the village. But then you'd stay places like Lyon, and there are hundreds of pilgrims staying there.
And you mentioned the peak season. Would that be summer?
Summer, yeah, when people are out of school. I think I was told a lot of college students like to walk it in the summertime when they're out of school. I wanted to read to you, actually, I kept a journal, and I was going to read to you things that I've learned on the Camino. Number 1, walk diligently and carry your weight, but stop every 2 hours, drop your pack, and drink a cup of coffee. 2, regard your possessions lightly. Give away what you don't need. 3, getting by on less is best. 4, think, pray, sing, talk, and dance. 5, people will come into your life and go out again. 6, look out for others and they will look out for you. 7, the journey is the destination. 8, know your limits. Just because your mind, intellect, and emotions want to walk 30 kilometers doesn't mean your feet can. 9, the items you start with aren't the same as the ones you end with. Some things which seem critical at the start of the journey are discarded, while others which don't initially seem important are acquired. 10, stop at all the churches and pray. Punctuate your day with God. 11, pay attention to your body. 12, most of the Camino is 2 trails side by side. It's good to walk together sometimes. 13, little steps bring big results. And that was one of the things that struck me, is like, sometimes people say, how could you walk 500 miles? I could never walk 500 miles. And I'll tell you, I would never in a million years, if you'd asked me 2 years before then, would you walk 500 miles? I'd say, are you kidding me? But you break it up into little nuggets, and it all becomes very doable. Denise, you asked about training. Everybody did the Camino differently, and you'd run into people. The youngest people I walked into, they were children walking with their parents. The oldest person I saw was an 84-year-old woman walking. Different people for different ages. You could get services which would carry your pack for you. So you just need to walk yourself and a little day pack, and then you could see it sounds like a cheat, but the slogan on the Camino was, there's no bad Camino. Everyone does the Camino they can do. And you don't look down your nose just because you started at kilometer 100 instead of kilometer 800, or because you didn't carry your own pack, or because you needed to slow down, or you could only walk 10 miles a day or 5 miles a day instead of 15, whatever it is, or it took you longer or shorter. Sometimes there were these young men, 20 somethings, who'd be like, we're going to do the whole Camino in a week, and they'd walk 40 miles in a day, and they'd limp into the albergue at night, and they were crippled. They could, and they're like, Camino would end. They often albergues would have, there were doctors foot doctors sort of along the way, and I remember there was this one young man, and he walked 40 miles, and he was one day, and they looked at his feet and they said, your Camino's over, it's done. And it's because he wasn't paying attention to his body. He wasn't paying attention to the reality. His ego got in the way of it. And so he didn't, but old people like me, just plugging along, tortoise in the hare, tortoise won. And there's a reason for that. So that was a little lesson there. One of the most poignant, another reason people walk the Camino was in honor of somebody who had died, or someone in their life who was important to them. So a lot of times people walked it as a sign of honoring and reverence to somebody. And one of the most beautiful experiences I had of that was one evening I was in albergue, and this woman, maybe mid-60s, came up to me. I didn't know her. And she said, would you like to join me downstairs for a birthday celebration for my husband? And I said, sure. And she says, come down in about 10 minutes. And she went to several different people, none of whom she knew, and said, come on down. So about half a dozen of us went downstairs, and there was a separate room, and the owner of the albergue was a woman. She just ran it. It was her business. And the woman who had invited us had a couple of bottles of wine, and she had candles out, and she lit all the candles, and she told us the story. She said, my husband, today is his birthday, would have been his 65th birthday, but he died a year ago, and of cancer, and I've just been grieving, and I've been so distraught, and I made a vow on his deathbed that I would walk the Camino in his honor. And so I started walking I think she was walking from Belgium. She was from Belgium, and she said, I just started walking, and the first day I could walk 3 kilometers, and that's as far as I could go. So I started in France, but you can actually start in Paris, you could start in England, you can start in Belgium. There are all these different ways you can come in. So she started in Belgium, and she'd been walking for months. So she just was walking a few kilometers each day. She could get a few more kilometers. And now she was not quite at Santiago, but it was her husband's birthday. She wanted to celebrate and honor him. So she talked about him and lit the candles, and then we all had a toast to her husband. And then she just said, and then, we asked her, she told more stories about him, and then we told stories, and then other people came downstairs, and then the woman who owned the albergue donated more bottles of wine, and then we're just telling, and then someone brought a cake. It was just this and these sorts of spontaneous, and we're all weeping and telling grieving stories, but it was beautiful and holy and precious, and this moment, and it was so for her, I think it was this really healing. It wasn't, but it was healing for her, but it was healing for us too who are participating in it. It's just spectacular.
Mm.
And these little moments happened over and over and over again along the Camino.
Mm. Interesting. Would you do it again?
Yes, in a heartbeat.
Yeah,
In a
I was just
heartbeat.
going to ask that. So yeah, are you planning it then?
I would need another sabbatical to do that because it's a big chunk of time. And yeah, and maybe not a pandemic, but that little item. I would love to do it again. I think there's some, I would give myself more time. I followed a pattern. There's actually a book. Mine is kind of shredded, but it tells you a path to take. You know, if you're going to do this many days, how far you need to walk each day. And I think I would go slower if I did it again. I would take more time. I would see the sights more. I would not, you know, I said walk 15 miles a day. And most of the time I would probably be fine with that, but I might have done more what this other woman did. And like at the beginning, just walk 5 or 10 miles a day for the first week and ease into it a little bit. Yeah, but I would love to do it again. I would just change a few things. Yes.
Could you remind us what year was this?
2013. 2013. Elizabeth, did you have your hand raised?
Yeah, as I told you the other day, my husband is from just north of Santiago. And by the way, it's his 65th birthday today.
Oh, happy birthday.
Thank you. And you know, I'm feeling kind of emotional because I haven't been to Spain in a number of years, but I've been there a number of times with him. And to see the familiar architecture and the hills, and yes, people often think it's sunny Spain. Well, not in Galicia, right? It's the dark and rainy part of Spain. But I've just really enjoyed seeing, and again, I've told you, I've been to Santiago, but not as a pilgrim. I've been to the cathedral, and I've eaten the special cake, and they have great jewelry stores there too. But thank you. I'm just really enjoyed this.
Oh, good. Thank you. I'm glad.
Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting.
And I would say, so for me, you know, some of the spiritually, it was a really profound experience as well, because it was, as I said, a walking meditation is what it turned into. It is how you experience it. And you get into this space for hours a day where you're just, I don't know how to, you're in your body and your brain shuts off and somehow your spirit expands. And you live in this sort of expanded spiritual state because you're just, during the day, you're just walking. And so it was like, it was meditating for hours and hours and hours and hours a day. That's what it felt like. And at the end of it, that's when I really committed to daily meditation in my life, was coming back from the Camino. That's what really kicked it off. I had done some, you know, on and off meditation, but that's what really kicked it off, because I felt like I was on a high for months afterwards. I don't know how to describe it, but it was this spiritual high for months afterwards. And that's what people say, is that the real effect of the Camino isn't even what happens on the Camino, it's what happens afterwards. And I find that I can maintain that high if I meditate regularly. So I do. Cynthia.
I wanted to say that my brother-in-law did a through hike of the Appalachian Trail several years ago, and he describes that whole hike the same way as you're describing this pilgrimage. It's just, and he was on a high afterwards. I met him, you know, very soon after he came back. He met my brothers soon after he came back. And it was, he just sounds just like you when he's talking about hiking the trail.
I can believe it. I can believe it. It's somehow getting out of our brain and into our body and letting go responsibilities, letting go of it. It just somehow something shifts. And that's what meditation does too. It's a letting go of the brain and just kind of getting into the body and spirit. And it shifts things. So that's fascinating to hear that, Cynthia. Thank you. Steve.
I thought it was interesting you were talking about the range of folks that you ran into from, it sounds like all over the world, but you said not as many Americans as you met from, you know, from other places. I thought that was kind of interesting. And the other observation was, first of all, I'm so glad you shared all these photos. It was just a wonderful way to journey with you, you know, through your walk. But there are so many similarities that to a lot of what I've seen in the smaller towns in Europe, especially in Italy. I've spent a lot of time traveling in Italy and those hilltop towns, and they're very contained, and you know when you're in the town and you know when you're not. And it just, and the poppy fields, and just, it was just really very sweet to follow along with you. So I really thank you for sharing that journey.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I've been to Italy too, and it's also, as you say, just, it's gorgeous, and it's there's a lot of similarities there. Any other questions? Wally?
It seems to me the biggest obstacle must have been your feet, and the preparation for what you're going to be wearing, and that had to be very difficult getting through this, the walking part of it.
Yes, yes. It was this. I ended up buying I bought 3 different pairs of hiking boots ahead of time. I started like, you know, I bought one pair and I wore them a few times, and I was like, this is not comfortable, and I sent it back. I got another pair and I wore them a couple times. I was like, this is not right. And I said, and I did that because the feet were so important. And this is what all the sites that I was online looking at were saying, you had to take care of your feet. And then I found this pair that was just like, this is the pair. This feels really comfortable and solid. And it was the most expensive piece of, you know, my gear that I had were my boots, and for good reason, because as you said, and then every day you had to, and then I'd stop during the day and sort of bandage them up if I sensed blisters forming, or there were all these different creams and lotions and socks and this and that to how to, you know, how do you maintain your feet so you don't have to go home early.
Yeah, I'm sure that caused some of the people to drop out because of the feet, the damage it was doing to their feet. I would think that you had to be pretty well broken in before you started out.
Right, and that was part of my, you know, my training myself was also breaking in the shoes, was trying to do both. So, you know, 3 months before I left for the journey, I started, you know, hiking every week to try to break them in for that. Exactly. You don't want to start a new shoes on that journey. Christine.
Hi, Stephanie. When you and also Cynthia were talking about this sort of spiritual high that you had after the Camino, and I was thinking about this just watching your hike. I've heard people, my cousin is one who had that high experience of like just that elated, freeing feeling after going to a third world country and living among people who have very little, but who are able to be happy. And they talk about how it changes them in exactly the way that you talked about having this just entirely different sort of feeling, not really knowledge, but just this feeling. And in the photos that you know, showed, it didn't look like you were walking through, you know, places where there was, you know, extreme poverty, but I was just wondering, maybe just being among people who, I mean, when you look at the Pilgrims, you all were carrying very little, you had very little, that maybe there was there something, is there something to that where you were just?
I think absolutely, absolutely. I think you actually are pointing to a really important piece of that, which is, and that was one of my little things you learned, is you don't need very much to live well. And when I think about how much of our life do we spend taking care of our possessions, washing our clothes, putting away things, vacuuming, you know, how much time do we spend caring for our possessions? It takes up an enormous amount of our life, is just care of our possessions. And if you don't have many possessions, that just frees up your life for fun stuff and good stuff and real human interactions, real engagement with people, real engagement with God. And I'm just as guilty, you know, in fact, I wrote, this was one of the things actually I wrote when in the journal, God, if I can find it, something about, anyway, I can't find it. I don't want to spend time looking for it, but I said something about that I could hardly stand to see, or I just I was uninterested in watching TV. I didn't care about the news. I didn't want to go shopping. It was just, it seems so trivial. And so much of our life is just filled with things that take up space, take up time, anesthetize us, and we don't get to live. And on the Camino, you live. There's no TV. There's no caring for possessions. It's just other people who are open, and you're open, and you're in a strange place, and you sort of glom together, and you're just being real for 40 days. And it's hard and it's beautiful. So have I converted anybody yet? Yeah, go ahead and see.
I have a question, just in terms of the pragmatics of it. So you start one place and you end a different place, but you're only transporting with you 20 pounds worth of stuff. So how do the logistics of that work? I assume you didn't walk the opposite direction to get back to your original stuff. So how does that work?
So I flew in and out of Madrid. So when I first arrived in Madrid one morning at 6 a.m., I found my way by various modes of transportation up to France at the start of the Camino. I spent the night in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, and then the next morning started my Camino. When I got to Santiago, there was I don't know if there's a bus or a train or something that I took to get from there back to Madrid, and then flew home from Madrid. So it was really easy there's lots of transportation between Santiago and Madrid, but it was getting up to Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port that was really tricky, because I think I took a train to one place, and then I could take a bus to another place, and then the last 50 kilometers I had to take a taxi, because there was no way to get to that little village in France.
So you literally, though, went to Europe with a backpack that you were going to be traveling with.
I was on the plane with my backpack, wearing my boots and my camping gear. I was like, you should just make the decision. Fashion goes out the window.
Yeah.
There's no jewelry, no makeup, no. Oh, this is one of the other funny things. So there's the first night. I told you the first day is the hardest. You're going over the Pyrenees, and then everyone goes to Roncesvalles. There's a big monastery there. This was historically where you go your first day. It's in 200 bunk beds or 400, but anyway, it's an enormous monastery just for pilgrims. And there's a big box they have there, and it's for people to deposit after their first day of hiking. They dump all the stuff they sort of realize, oh, I don't need this hair dryer. I don't need this, like whatever it is that they've been carrying with them in their pack. And it's like nothing. Like I told you, I think I was in Lyon halfway through the thing, and I went and bought myself lipstick, and I had to really think about it. I'm like, whatever, it's like 3 ounces. Am I willing to do? Okay, I'm gonna go for it. But you drop stuff off. So you just take nothing. You take almost nothing with you, and you just make a decision. You're going to get on the plane, and you're going to look stupid, and you're going to carry your backpack, and that's that. And you just go into it with that mindset, and everyone's doing the same thing.
It's very cool.
How often were you in touch with your family?
I was really fortunate. I was able to be in touch with them every day. I bought a little cell phone. It wasn't a smartphone. It's just a little cell phone. And I was able to get a service that allowed me to call the US for 1 cent a minute. Mm-hmm. So it was, and I had this great little tradition with my son, Duncan. He was a freshman in high school then. So he was 14. And he would walk to school in the morning at 7 a.m. So it was 1 p.m. in Spain. So we would joke, he had his backpack, walk to school, and I'd call him on his phone, and I'd have my backpack across Spain, and he was walking to the North Andover High School, and we would have a little 15-minute phone conversation every morning on his way as he walked to school. And then later in the day, I would speak to Bill and Jax as well. So yeah, that was actually, leaving the 3 of them was the hardest thing, and being able to speak to them daily was just really important.
Dee, were you mentioning that you were ready to sign up for the trip?
Oh, Dawn and I have talked about it many times.
I would love to
do that. Huh?
I'll go too.
Oh, there you go. We gotta retire first. Yeah. Getting the time off to do it would be tough until we're ready to retire. But I don't know, every day retirement's sounding better and better to us. So, it might be sooner rather than later for you.
Sure. Yeah. I wanted to do it ever since watching the movie. The Way.
I was just going to say, if anyone has not watched the movie, it's
fantastic.
Called The Way. It used to be on Netflix. I don't know if it still is. Have any of you seen it?
I think it is. We watched
is.
it many, many years ago, and we were actually, after we spoke with you, I don't know, a month or so ago, when you were talking about it, we actually looked again, and
it was there.
And it was on there. It was on Netflix. We saw it, or Amazon Prime, one of those. But it's a great movie for sure. Absolutely.
Martin Sheen.
Martin Sheen, his son, Emilio. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
really
it also gives you it gives you a really good sense of what the Camino is about.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I just looked it up. It is not on Netflix or Amazon right now, but you can rent it for $1.99 on YouTube. It's probably the easiest place.
Yeah.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Amy.
I have an app called Just Watch, and if you just put in any movie or TV show, it will tell you all the places it's available and how much it costs.
Oh my God, that's great.
It's a great app.
What's the app?
Just Watch.
Just Watch.
Just Watch. Oh, that's a good tip. Thanks, Amy.
Has anybody on this call seen the movie The Way? Raise your hand if you have. Oh, if you haven't, it's a good movie. I mean, it's got a plot that goes with it. It's not just about walking the way, the Camino, but I mean, how do you go wrong with Martin Sheen and Emilio Estevez and all the interesting people he encounters on his walk? So highly recommended. It's a good Sunday afternoon movie.
And that's actually what inspired me to I'd never heard of it until I saw the movie. And then I saw the movie and I'm like, I want to do this.
Right. Well, that's happened to us too. That's exactly the way we felt about it.
And it's funny because my husband, Bill, looked at it and he's like, I don't want to do that.
I was gonna say though, I think I've heard a TED talk from someone who talks about doing this and was not prepared. He just sort of showed up and he had all kind of difficulties and problems, and he was kind of escaping some other things in his life, and he just sort of showed up and started walking and had every single problem you can imagine, but it was all those people on the way that helped him, and he ended up doing the whole thing, and it changed his life. But
yeah, and I met someone like that too. He lost his job, and within a week he was just sort of showed up on the Camino and decided to start walking. Just, and yeah, some people do that. It's kind of, but that's fascinating to hear that that he credited the people that he met along the way, because that's one of the great gifts also. It's the people.
It reminds me a little bit in my 30s, I did the mid-30s, I did the Boston to New York AIDS ride, the bike ride. And the first day, I had never done a century before. And the first day was 100-mile ride through the hills of, Massachusetts into the hills of Connecticut. And part of the most powerful part of that was the people you were with that were encouraging each other along the way, and the friendships that you made with these total strangers, similar to what you're describing. And then, of course, the pain associated with sitting back on your bike the second morning. So in that case, it wasn't your feet you were taking care of, but man, it's a different part of the body that you really felt it in. So, but it's just very, very reminiscent of that experience. And you're right. 4 days into it, I was on a high for a while after that, and that was only 4 days. So I can only imagine, what 40 days is like.
Yeah. And people can go for shorter. As I said, you can just go for a week. You don't have to go for the whole 800 kilometers. You can just go for the last 100 kilometers or whatever. So we are approaching 8:30. So I think we're gonna close down. Is there any last minute burning questions? And if you think of something later, if you want to ask, feel free. And but thank you for inviting me to be part of this, to offer this and share this. It's been really lovely to relive it with you all. It's been a while since I've looked at those pictures. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you so much.
thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. That was amazing.
Yeah.
Very enjoyable.
And Stephanie, so glad you're at Emmanuel, and it's so good to see all of you. So
Good to see you. Amy.
Great seeing you, Amy.
Likewise, good to see you.
Yeah, it's been a while.
All right, everyone. Have a good night. We'll see you tomorrow. Oh, and don't forget daylight savings overnight.
Change your
Spring
clocks.
forward.
bye.
Get some rest, John and Faith.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.